Thank you for coming to this panel. That we dedicated this panel to the challenges that different Holocaust centers, museums, authentic World War II sites, the challenges we face as educators in different types of audiences that are coming to our institutions. And we have here 7 panelists. I have no intention of introducing them because you're going to match the faces to the bios in your bio book. Some of you have been very successful at doing that. And I will just mention the names as we go along. And the structure that I would like to do this afternoon is I'm going to be asking questions to different panelists that they've asked us to ask them certain questions. They're going to try and give very concise and short answers. And we're going to leave time for questions from you, from the audience, that you would like to pose to any one of the panelists here. Just to give you an idea, we have here museums from all over the world. Yad Vashem, Moscow, Paris, South Africa, Cape Town, the USHMM, Washington, D.C., Melbourne, Australia, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. The first question I'm going to ask, I'm going to direct it to ladies first, to Graciela, is the following. What are the educational objectives for students in Holocaust centers and museums? And how can we create a significant educational experience in a half or a full day session when these students come to your center? Graciela.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I told you by phone, but here, publicly, that I'm very proud to be here. And to talk about the museum and what are we doing, what are we working in this moment, especially with students of secondary school, of media school, high school. We are trying to tell them about the story of the Shoah, what happened with our different minorities there, with the Jews there during the Shoah, but especially they are going around the museum in the guided visits, and they are asking about not only the Holocaust, they are asking about human rights, they are asking about dictatorship. You can see South America had a lot of dictatorship, so they connect directly. And we had the opportunity to talk with Yehuda Bauer, Professor Bauer in Buenos Aires, and he told us to talk about politicide, to difference perfectly Holocaust than dictatorship. And this is what we are doing. And the objectives are to know the Shoah, what happened there, but also to know and to be very closely human rights, and also this significant educational experience is a very short time, as you mentioned here, is to know about the Shoah, but also to have the core, story and core, with the testimonies of the survivors. As you may know, the survivors are very old today. Not every time we have a survivor to talk with the students, but we have different documentaries, also films done by the Holocaust Museum with different universities, and we showed this to have a final moment talking with the students and their professors.
Graciela, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Jacques, with your permission. And I'm going to ask the same question. Works?
I think.
I'm going to ask the same question, but I'd like you to tell us also something about what type of students are coming to your center. What is their ethnic, religious background, the problems you're encountering, specifically there in France, of those that are coming to visit your museum?
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation to this very important conference. And I try to answer to your last question, after that to the first question. We are working with public school, and most of the school who are welcome in the memorial are coming from different parts of France. Let's say that 50% are coming from outside Paris, and we have people from different places, rich, not rich, very well informed, not informed, people from different communities, because today in France we have a various community of people, and especially Muslim people, a very important Muslim community. And what is true is that for a part of that of the population, it's not a part of their own history. It means that, as you know, the Shoah happened also in a page of the Shoah happened in France. And when we talk about France, it's a page of the French history. It means that we are not talking about something that happened in Africa, in Asia. No, it happened in France. And we are talking about a page of history of France. But for them, it's not a page of their own history, and because they are coming from other countries. And we have to find the good way, because they are living in France, and they have to take into account that page of history. And I have to tell you that it's not easy, but it's not difficult. It means that for the people who are coming to the memorial, so the question is that we have to ask a question about the people who are not coming to the memorial, because we don't know what kind of reaction they have. We have to take into consideration that most of the children who are coming to the memorial didn't decide. It's imposed by the teachers. And it's not easy for them to be in a Jewish place, to be in a museum, to be out of the school. And we have to find a good way to try to explain that this history that we are out of the classroom, and we are not a teacher. We just want to bring them knowledge that could be useful for them, not in the classroom, but for their lives. And this is, I think, one of the most important thing. But you know, one of the aspects, one of the approach that we have, especially for the people coming from other communities, we are talking about Jews coming from abroad who arrived in France between in the 30s. We had a lot of people coming from abroad and didn't speak French, and were not rich, and were received in France. And sometimes they can find identification with people who are coming from abroad, and it's a way also to fight prejudice, because you know, people who are coming to the memorial, they think that all the people that in the memorial are Jewish, and they think that it's a kind of meeting with Judaism, you know, and we have also to respond to questions that what is a Jew. Sometimes they ask the questions that they don't dare to ask in other places. What is a Jew? What is Judaism? What do you wear? Okay, sometimes the guide is not Jewish, and he has to give explanation, because I think it's very important, because he thinks that we are all Jewish, and we know that. And we had to give a very good training to guides that are not Jewish. And even for the Jewish, because even if you are Jewish, sometimes you don't have the good answers. And this is very, very important. And besides the history, we try to give individual stories about people that came from abroad and maybe have the same problem of integration in the French society that they have. And you know, this is a part of the activity, but you know, we are organizing also trips to Auschwitz. About 5,000 kids every year are going to the camp of Auschwitz. And it's something very interesting because it's 1 year project. It's 1 year project. And for that, kids must write a letter to explain why they want to go to Auschwitz. If they don't want, they will not be in the project. They have to write a letter and to explain why. And after that, they are in the project. It's 1 year project. And in the middle of the project, we are traveling to Auschwitz. We have 1 day visit of Birkenau and Auschwitz. And it is something else because it's a long project. And during that long project, we have the time to speak about the history of the Jewish community before the war, the point of view of the victims. It means that we are talking a lot about history, and because I think this is today the most important thing. Museums are not only places of commemoration as they were a long time ago. Today we are dealing with history in some museums. We are also writing. We are in Yad Vashem, and Avner knows exactly about what I'm talking. In some places, like in Yad Vashem, in museums, they are writing history. It means that museums are not outside scholars, studies. And today it's a part of the activities of the museum. It's why I think today one of the objectives, it was the question, is to speak, to deal with history, because we have always to contextualize the national history. What happened in France it's not the story, it's a history of the Jewish community, it's a history of the French national history, and it's a history of Europe. And we have to contextualize, we have to show that it's not only a French fact, it's European fact. And we have to give the level of the murder and to try to explain what is a genocide. And I think we have to give knowledge. I say knowledge because sometimes, a long time ago, museums were giving, and even in our museum, we were giving only emotion. And we know today that it's not enough. Because people have to go back home with knowledge and to really understand the mechanism of what happened. And after that, I just want to say that, to finish, the third thing that we have to give is to give the knowledge for reflection. I don't think we have to give moral lessons to the people who are coming to us. I think this is the role of the parents, this is the role of the teachers, this is not the role of museum, but this is my point of view. We have to give the knowledge, and the people have to think by themselves about a moral lesson.
Jacques, thank you. I'm going to turn to Tzvi from the Holocaust Museum in Melbourne. Having visited your museum, how do you give a significant educational experience in a half day, a few hours, or a full day program in your museum?
Thank you, Ephraim, and also thank you as well on behalf of myself and all of the Australians who are here today with us for hosting us so graciously. Even a half day, we don't have the luxury of a half day. Those of you who work in museums know, and those of you who are teachers will remember, organizing an excursion, a trip, collecting permission slips, getting on the buses, getting the agreement of a teacher whose class you're missing. It's very difficult. So a half day for us would be a luxury. We have 2 hours, maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes. So you might think that in 2 hours and 15 minutes, what can you do? It would take 6 hours at least to walk through the museum here. How could we possibly do anything in 2 hours or 2 hours and 15 minutes? It's very possible. And there are a few, I think, things we must keep in mind, or I think we should keep in mind. I don't like saying must to anybody. But I think we're well advised to, first of all, have faith in the teachers who are bringing the students. I know that when I started at the museum, and I'm a teacher, when I started at the museum, and I just observed for the first few weeks, months, there was a feeling that the teachers don't know anything. We have to make up all the gaps in their knowledge. So we've changed that, and we're in contact with teachers before they arrive. We know what they're studying, in particular, not just Holocaust, and I just received an email for next week's booking schedule. They're here for 20th century history. They're reading Night. They're seeing The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I know I don't like that movie either, but at least it brings them to a museum. They're doing human development. They are doing human rights. There's a group of nurses, professional nurses who are coming. So we know in advance why people are coming. I have faith that the students aren't just coming on day one, and this is the sum total of Holocaust education. So knowing that, I have faith that the teachers have already introduced the topic, and they have, and many of the teachers who bring their students to our museum are graduates of your program here. So we have a very good relationship with the teachers. We don't try to do everything. Less is more. And I think a guiding principle is we know that many of the students come in, they arrive fairly indifferent. Our goal is to ensure they leave different. Not necessarily with tons and tons of facts and figures and statistics, because that isn't going to matter to them. They're also coming because they have an assessment, a test, a project, an exam, something they've got to spit this knowledge out for. And we all know that once an exam is over, we forget. So we don't want the students to forget, and we tell them that. So we're here to affect them differently. And the key to that is not to speak to them, and not to lecture them, and not to tell them this is a display of this, and look at this map, you'll notice X, Y, or Z. We've reversed the process. We ask them questions that I think motivates them to think about what they're seeing and to reflect upon a picture. Why is this rabbi standing there? What's that body language saying? How do you think the photographer felt who took this picture? And we get the kids to respond, so it's a very interactive way of being with them in the museum. But of course, the highlight is to meet a survivor, and we are blessed. Our museum was founded by Holocaust survivors. It was a very grassroots type of effort. We're now much more professionalized, but they are still there every single day. Every day, a school group will meet at least one, if not two, Holocaust survivors, sometimes in a larger setting, sometimes 6 students around the table with a survivor. Every single group does this. And that is really the most powerful. But I would just like to add one last thing, and that is any museum, I believe, and I will say the word must provide some opportunity for the students and teachers, survivors and guides, and our guides, by the way, are all volunteers, not trained professional historians, but to come back together and to ask 3 questions. And I learned these 3 questions at an in-service, a professional development session in New York City from someone, I don't remember his name, but they've stuck with me ever since, in 1982. He said you can structure all learning about any topic around 3 questions. What? So what? Now what? And we discussed with the students, well, what have you learned? What have you seen? What will you remember? What has really hit you hard? What are you going to talk about when you get home? So what difference does it make? Why was it important? Why'd you come here? But more importantly, now what? Now, what will this mean, not when you get your exam paper in front of you and you'll be able to remember on the map in the Jewish Holocaust Museum, I got the information. No. 15 years from now, when you are parents, now what will this mean for you? And some of them even begin to answer. But again, like Jacques said, we leave that to them to really deal with. So you can do a lot in a very little time. But the key is probably to start by not trying to do too much.
Thank you, Tzvi. I'm going to move into a different question. I'm going to address this to Avner. And this is the question of how do we include, or do we include, other genocides within our Holocaust history museums? Avner.
I think that the question that Ephraim has presented has to do with the different types of museums. I think that we have to divide all those kinds of museums, and not to give a general answer. I cannot give such an answer. I think that there are the type of authentic museums that are set around or in authentic sites. And my position, as I started and I commented at the beginning, are to be very particular museums who deal with the particular subject matter. And I think this is the only appropriate approach, which is not done, I think, in a very manipulating way. Because if the site has to do with a certain historical affair or event, we have to describe it and to give and let the visitors experience the authenticity of the site. And this is the case with those kind of museums. So if you will ask Piotr, who is not here, but he lectured this morning, would you allow some introduction about all kinds of genocides, in Birkenau or even in Auschwitz? I think that his answer will be no. Only those authentic events that have happened on that ground should be related in our display. This is the A. And the B is that I will do in a very subtle and modest way the dealing and the presentation of the authentic site. As far as we can, let's keep the authenticity and the explanation and the difference between I think the experience that a person has when he come and visited the authentic ground and what we are wanted to interpret and our interference within how you shape the memory of history is a different issue. This is the A. The B is a different kind of museums, and I think that in the case of, I don't know, Argentina and Melbourne and Paris, someone made a decision, and I think rightly so, that some community wants, or a state or a city, wants to cope with the history of the Shoah. This is very legitimate. And again, I think that in those cases, the museum itself, the display, mainly has to concentrate on the contents of the Shoah. There is a background, there is a context, but the main text should be dealt with the particular case, because I do believe that if we want to gain something, and I agree completely with my three colleagues about what we can achieve from this kind of an experience. I think the museum is not a textbook. Museum is not a lesson in in high school or university class. The museum has to provide two elements. One is knowledge, some knowledge. And the second, if we have the authenticity, this is the best, because the major idea of museums were authenticity, to meet the real thing. But nowadays we have many kinds of types of other museums and presentations and displays. So if we cannot provide the authenticity, we have to do something with knowledge. The second thing is something which is providing an experience, emotional experience, combination between the knowledge and a kind of revelation. And I think this is a process that goes and done by the visitor and not by the guide. And I think it has to be open for the visitor to go through this kind of a process. Otherwise, we didn't do our job. And if these two elements are met, we did something very basically. And those kind of particular museums who are dealing with the history or the story or the stories of the Shoah are dealing with particularly the Shoah, they did their job. I'm not saying by that they are not allowed to deal with the context. And the context can be a wider understanding of a larger phenomena, which is the phenomena of the genocide, but not to present different genocide as a need to understand the Shoah. This is a process that can be and is very useful in the academic processes, in scholarly work, as Dvorak said and others, and I agree with it, and I said it in my presentation 2 days ago, that comparative studies are a very important part of what we are doing, or the researchers are doing, and are providing the information, but we, the educators, or we, the curators, who has some another different, I think, aims and tools that we are dealing with, have to take out the essence of their research and to use it in a very useful way. And the language of museum is totally different and unique to the museums. And we have to speak with the tools and the language that we have to use in our profession as curators. This is the second sphere. There are the third type of museums. I don't know how to define them. That museums are dealing generally with human rights, evil, atrocities, suffering, death, I don't know what. I would not prefer this kind of museums, but they exist, and some of them are pretty good museums. And they have to check what they are going to tell. Because in a certain community, there are different narratives or different chapters or different communities, and they want to gather all those histories in one space, under one roof, in one museum. It can be done. It can be done in different spaces and not a mishmash. I'm afraid of mishmash because I do not want to give some examples, but in some cases, what you find at the end of the day is suffer, death. Suffering and suffer is the same for any human being. We know it. It doesn't make any difference. But this is not the essence of what we want to provide. And this is not the kind of experience that we want to provide to youngsters, to bring them to think about. And the three, if you want, are very relevant because it ends, now what? So now what? It opens. And if we close, we miss it. If we open them to think, rethink, maybe to integrate, to encourage them to get more information, more knowledge. So it has to deal with those human aspects. Without them, we're lacking something. So if it's a mishmash of all kinds of atrocities, I'm afraid of it. This is not my approach, it's not my belief. We have to be very particular to get the atmos of any narrative. And there is a legitimacy to speak and to tell and to teach its narrative on its own in different communities or in one community if it's relevant to their life, because we have to actually to give responsibility to what is relevant to our audience. Why we are providing it, why we are building the museums, what are the aims. And this kind of museum is much more problematic. So to conclude, Frank, to your question, my belief that the most universal and the most touching elements are the most particular elements that are providing. And always, all of us who are dealing with these kind of educational processes, and specifically curators of museums, know that only the particular, the specific item, the specific artifact, the specific testimony, the specific encounter of a human story. Without a human story, there is no, even Professor Bauer is here, and he always starts, and he said in his presentation to the educators, stories are essential. And human stories are very particular stories. So if we miss these kind of stories, which are very human, in our detailed, particular chapters of our presentations in the museum, we lost a lot. So this is my belief. And then the outcome of it, and I do believe, and this is the process that we have in Yad Vashem, that it's not just a visit tour to the museum, and in many cases this is what we can allow because we are the limitation of time, as in the case of Melbourne and many other cases. They are coming for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and that's it. That's what we have. But here in Yad Vashem, we are actually developed a process that are coming at least for half a day. And then there is a certain, introduction according to the needs of the classroom, of the school, of the pupils, and so on and so forth. And then a guided tour to the museum to deal with some of the aspects. I do believe that less is more. So we are touching some of the elements. I know for sure, and any one of us knows so well, that at the end of the tour of the museum, someone will take with him 2, 3 memorable elements that he will take back home. But this is the most that I can achieve. And if he, she takes it home, and they are elaborating, and they are actually bringing themselves to think where I am with regard to the topic. What is my personal responsibility? We did the utmost. And then afterwards, the next will come afterwards. So in our schools, they are going down after the visit to the museum, and they are sitting together, analyzing, discussing, questioning, discussing. In that case, we can enlarge, of course, why not? This is the case. Sorry.
Avner, thank you very much. IIya, from the Moscow Holocaust Center. I'm going to come back to that question, because I'd like to ask also the Cape Town Holocaust Museum and the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C. But I'm going to ask you to go back to that first question, and how do you provide a significant educational experience to students that are coming to your museum, and who are they?
Thank you very much for possibility to participate in this distinguished panel. And for me, Russian experience, it's also, for my opinion, it's very difficult as a country who have so big losses during the Second World War. 27 millions. Everybody in my country knows this figure, the person who was killed during the war, mostly in the front, in blockade Leningrad, so on. But now, the recently surveys show that the last part of the young people keep so personal attention to the victims and losses of the Second World War as was in previous time. So for our center that was established 20 years ago with the strong support of Yad Vashem, and as I know was maybe first center in the Europe that choice in the title of our organization, the term Holocaust, was on the first step was very difficult to involve the teachers in these problems, because everybody knows and could use another sources than we usually use in the education of the Shoah, on the example what had happened on the occupied territory, Soviet Union especially, by step. And when the Holocaust Museum appeared on Poklonnaya Gora, these historical places in Moscow, when 100 and 1,000 persons during the holiday visited these places and visited Central Museum of the Second World War, Orthodox Church, our memorial synagogue, they could receive more information about the Holocaust from the first hand. And for us, we try to work in the situation when we don't have Holocaust National Memorial Day. It's very interesting. Russian army, Red Army, liberated Auschwitz, but Russian authorities not recognize this as a national days. So the first difficulty, how to explain, how to put this subject to our educational program. Now it's appearance in many handbooks, so it gives opportunity our teachers to come to our museum. This is about 2,000 schools in Moscow, so you understand that it's in a very big city, and we try to invite these teachers and students to our museum. We don't have any difficulties, or the problem the same like in another country. One difficulty with students is the lack of the knowledge about of the events, historical events. But I was very happy when one student wrote in the book Responses, a very big book that we have in our museum. Before I am coming, I think I don't like the history as a lessons. Now I understand that the lessons is very important for my personal life. Only after they visited and saw what had happened with Jewish victims during the Holocaust on the territory of the Soviet Union. The very big problem now, there's a problem with the society. Recently in our news media was appeared the information that our training institution will be hold 72 hours teaching program in local training institution. But our internet now, it's a lot of the protests. Why it's necessary to teach Holocaust in Russian school, when on the subject totally history of the Second World War, we have only 4 hours. In this case, the visitor to the museum, outside the lessons, during the different events, this is very important way, connection between teachers, students, and victims of the Holocaust. We really try to choose our own approach to the memory of the Holocaust. as a part of the memory about the war in our own country, as well as our colleagues mentioned before me. And also we pay attention on the role of the liberators. We mentioned the victims, we mentioned the, of course it's very important also do it about the righteous among the nation, but for country like our country, United States and Great Britain, some other countries, it's very important to mention the liberators because this person may be living in the families of our students. This is very important. And also, not easy to involve in the international relations sometimes the colleague from the different countries and as well and from our Jewish school. I give only one example. It's very strong program, Masasho Rashim, for the Jewish school in our country. But it not starting in the museum, not finished in the museum. And this is relation with Ministry of Education of Israel and some directors of our school. It's a good resource for solve some practical question in this activity.
IIya, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Richard Freedman from the Cape Town Holocaust Museum. I haven't forgotten you, Fred. Peter, don't worry. I haven't forgotten you, Peter. Don't worry. In South Africa, you face very unique problems with the former apartheid regime. And having that Holocaust Museum that you have in Cape Town, how do you integrate the history of the Holocaust, the apartheid regime? What is your approach in your museum?
How do we integrate? Well, it starts off with the fact that we have to acknowledge context. Every single person in South Africa is either related directly to somebody who has experienced apartheid directly or has experienced apartheid themselves. So they've lived in a racial state. And the racial state has only just really, we've just moved out of that racial state in 1994. So the centers in Johannesburg and in Durban and in Cape Town, which form one umbrella organization, the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, are really responding to context historically, in terms of the Holocaust, in terms of apartheid, and in terms of the modern context, where there's a tremendous amount of healing still to be done in our country. And where, in fact, racism and prejudice and xenophobia and every other kind of marginalization is alive and well. And whilst we have a new constitution which has addressed these issues on the paper, none of it has actually been internalized for most people. So the center had to take on a task which was really to say, if Holocaust education was going to be a catalyst to involve people in their own history, then there was a place for it in the country. There was no place for it in the country unless it had the ability to engage people with their own past. So the centers themselves have a reference, an acknowledgement of apartheid experience in their displays and in the programs and in the interaction with the people that come there. That is, it's not the main focus. It is part of the focus, and I like to use that word as it's an acknowledgement, because that acknowledgement is very, very important. You cannot engage people in the history of others, as in our opinion, until you've actually engaged them in, you acknowledge their own suffering. And that we've all been talking for 3 days about suffering is suffering and there's no comparison. So we're not trying to do that. But unless you can acknowledge a person's experience, we don't feel that there is a valid place for the program. So that's what it does. It's not the main focus, but it does that. And through that, people walk into that exhibition. And by the way, we don't call ourselves a museum. We are educational centers. We are centers for engagement. So they come into that exhibition and they see that acknowledgement of their own past, and they can see those parallels between 33 and 39, Nazi Germany and South Africa for the last 50 years. And they'll see that and say, but this is also about us. In some way, this must be about us. And then we take them into a really deep, factual core, if you want, experience of what this Holocaust is. And all the way providing opportunities for reflection. because those opportunities for reflection on that experience of the 4 hours that those schools spend with us in that morning is the key thing, and that's at various intervals in the program. After the introduction, which is more or less a baseline experience, after the experience of visiting the exhibition itself, which is only an hour and a quarter, and after that, through various videos, personalizing the story. We don't have access to survivors in the same way as other places do, so that's not always part of our programs. And we have the other additional challenge in that the curriculum in South Africa includes the Holocaust. It's a compulsory 15-hour unit. It's a full term of the school year, and it is only second to the teaching of apartheid at the age of 14, grade 9. So we have to support that national curriculum, and that national curriculum teaches both those two histories back to back. So whether we like it or not, it's there. And so that's the way that we have to deal with it in making sure that we are not minimalizing either history. Because the director of the Apartheid Museum once said to me, the education director, she said, you know, you cannot make it look as if apartheid was a walk in the park. That's what you're doing if you're putting the Holocaust onto some kind of pedestal of suffering. And of course, that's not what we were doing. But that's how that's what was her fear in the first instance, was that we would be minimizing the suffering and the history of the context in which we've placed these museums. I don't know whether I've answered the question, but those are the complexities that we deal with.
You've not only answered the question, but you've raised about 3 more questions that we'd all like to ask you. But I'm going to ask Peter, as the head of the United States Holocaust Museum, how do you integrate the history of the Holocaust, other victims of World War II, other genocides within that federal institution?
Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all for being here. I know many of you have come a long ways. It's great to see many familiar faces and to have met some new ones during the week. First of all, the question, or the original question, was posed in writing a few weeks ago: should museums and centers feel compelled to include other genocides, contemporary genocides, in their programs?
You actually read my emails, don't you?
I actually read your emails, Ephraim. And my simple answer is no. My second part of that answer is, what's the mission of your museum? What's the mission of your center? In the case of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the commitment to raising awareness about genocide was built into the foundation of the museum when it opened. And so that remains foundational. Our core mission is the history of the Holocaust, teaching the history of the Holocaust, raising awareness about anti-Semitism, and as well as that, raising awareness about genocide. Now, our Committee on Conscience, which is the office that controls that, has evolved over the last 20 years. So they began as a awareness-raising organization, and as all of you know, there are many, many of those organizations in the world today. With the advent of the genocide in Darfur, many organizations suddenly popped up. So that was no longer a role that we felt was important for us. So we have evolved now to a particular point where our focus is, how do you influence policy at the highest levels to bring an awareness of genocide so that governments can cooperate to prevent genocides. And so that's kind of the evolution of what's happened with our Committee on Conscience. Now, in the programs I run, I'm the Director of National Outreach for Teacher Programs. And so I direct all of our teacher education in the United States. We always start with the Holocaust, always. The core, if you will, and our educational philosophy is that we always start with content and we go right to the actual documents, the photographs, the documents, the things that we have in our museum, and we direct teachers to other websites and other centers as well. So it starts with content, then we also feel that it's important to set those things, that knowledge, in a larger context. So that's the context of World War II, for example, a context of what country are we talking about, when are we talking about in history. And then the third thing is to add complexity. So we want students and teachers to be comfortable with complexity. Everybody in this room walked into the conference earlier in the week with a narrative about the Holocaust. Right? You all have something in mind about what it means to understand the Holocaust. The teachers, the students who come to us are really no different. They're not empty vessels. And so it's important that we understand that narrative. And generally, in the United States, it's a very simple narrative when students or teachers come to us. It's the narrative of some evil person who was most likely insane, named Hitler, found some other evil, insane people, and they needed a scapegoat to take over the world. So they chose, randomly, the Jews, who turned out to be victims, and every now and then, a saintly rescuer would come to the rescue and save one or two people. Now that's very simplified, of course, but no student can relate to an insane person who's evil. No student can relate to a victim, and no student can relate to a saint. And so what we want to do is encourage students and teachers to peel back those layers of the Holocaust history. We talked about relevance earlier in the year. The more you peel back those layers, the more specific you get, the greater chance an individual is going to have of finding that relevance that we talked about earlier. Have I answered your question?
You've done a great job, Peter.
Thank you.
I'm going to do something that I didn't originally plan to do. I'd like to raise the temperature in the room by stopping at this point right now. Everyone has answered at least one question that I posed to them in emails. Some read them exactly what I was writing to them. And I'm going to turn to the audience. Since the audience here is made up of other participants that come from Holocaust museums, come from Holocaust centers, and I'd like you stand up one by one, and if you have a question, something specific that you'd like to ask the panel, I will direct the flow, but it has to be a question. I don't want someone to stand up here and tell me all about their center, because I'll stop you. If you have a question that you'd like to pose to the panel, please. Okay, Bill, first one, stand up and speak loud.
I'll preface it by saying that I appreciate the theoretical discussion we just...
One sec, I'm going to give you give me one of the...
Can you hear? Okay. Let me preface it by saying I appreciate the theoretical discussion we've just engaged in, or heard you engage in. As I travel around the United States, I find more and more centers and museums under pressure from boards of directors and funders to shift their mission, to deal with things that are somewhat tangential from my perspective and certainly Avner's perspective. How do you find the same, and how do you deal with that?
Okay, I asked one question. You asked two questions, but we'll answer one of them. Okay. Jacques, would you like to relate to that?
Okay.
How funders are
Yes.
more or less forcing us to go in directions we might not have wanted to go.
No, we don't have that problem. The money is a problem, but we are. I agree with you. It means that with much more money we could do more, but we are independent, and we are an NGO, and we are free. And we are not only free, but we also decide what kind of money we accept. Sometimes we refuse money coming from different parts of the society because we know that sometimes it's a kind of manipulation. But most of the time we don't refuse money. But we are not obliged to do things But we are very cautious in partnership because we are all dealing with education. We are not involved in politics. And sometimes with the money, it's a way to manipulate. And we are also dealing with genocide, not because we were convinced by Yehuda Boer, but yes, we were convinced by Yehuda Boer's speeches. But because it's a French and European society, it's a necessity, and maybe later I will explain why. But today, the manipulation in Europe is human right, because human right became a religion, and it's really the danger for us, and the danger of manipulation, of relativization, is here in human right, and sometimes we are obliged to refuse money in different programs because we don't want to deal with human right.
Jacques, thank you very much. There's another question. Yes, in the back, please. Yes, you. Yes. Just also tell us your name and who you represent.
My name is Medin Shachar, and I represent the Ghetto Fighters House in northern Israel. My question is about holistic approaches to Holocaust education and multi-layer direction, meaning is there just a one-time visit to the museum, or do you also have programs that deal with later visits or programs that one person said a year long, but I'm wondering if there are multi-age programs where children are coming back at different times, different periods, different programs. Want to hear a little more about, is there like a follow-up with the children that come to visit?
Thank you. Graciela.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have different programs. I want also to tell you that the museum in Buenos Aires is since 19 years ago, and we are trying with different projects, also for teachers, for educators, as seminars, and different opportunities they have. Also, a lot of them are today here. A lot of these educators around the country. Argentina is a very big country, and it is not easy to have all together all the educators. And I think that if we are talking about students, we must talk first about educators and how to deal with capacitations, with seminars. And you know, Bill, how many seminars we did in Houston and in Yad Vashem, you know also, with these educators. And we have different programs for teachers and also for educators at all. I'm talking also about journalists as educators sometimes, and I'm talking about universities, programs, and people from universities talking with their students also, not only the teachers at school, at middle school. And we have different projects, different programs, and I don't remember, but you also talk about the question, where are you coming to the museum? To these teachers, they are coming with their students. And we also do this. And they include a lot of times in Argentina that they are coming because the violence they have in their schools, or the violence they have in their neighborhood or the society at all. And this is something that if you asked me 10 years ago, it was impossible to come to a museum of the Shoah in Buenos Aires to talk about violence at school. But today, it's a reality. It happens, and also we have programs, not only these 2 or 3 or 4 hours, the pupils and the teachers here.
I forgot your first name, but I saw your tag, Great Britain.
Thank you. My name is Olivia Marks-Waldman, and I'm from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust in the United Kingdom. I wanted to ask, Does commemoration play a part in your museums? And if so, what role does it play?
Who volunteers? Richard? Take a microphone.
Is this working? Yes. Well, we have taken upon ourselves to help with the commemoration in terms of national commemoration. I'm talking particularly about the United Nations. The Shoah, Yom HaShoah, is commemorated by the Jewish communities all over South Africa, and they run programs, and that's for themselves.
What date do you use?
But
the Jewish community. What date do you use?
For Yom HaShoah, we use the ghetto uprising, April.
The
so
Israeli.
Yes, the same one. For United Nations Holocaust Day, of course, it's the 27th of January. But that day came, and it sort of appeared in the press, and we wrote an article about it, and nothing happened. So we actually contacted the United Nations offices in South Africa, and we offered to partner them in running the national commemorations in as many centers as possible. Of course, it was more than partnering. Partners suggest that there was an equal sharing of roles. It wasn't that. We had to do all the organization, and we continue to do all the organization, but with their support. So if we were not there, I have doubt that it would happen at all.
Thank you. Yes, first row. You're also Great Britain?
Yeah.
Okay.
The British are coming.
Okay.
We're back, I should say.
I won't comment.
I would like to know, of your sort of collective experience, what you offer for family visitors to your museums. We have a tremendous amount of visitors who are coming in informally rather than in an educational group. I should just explain, I work for the Imperial War Museum, London.
Thank you. Peter, would you like to relate to that?
I'll answer it the best I can. We don't have, I would say, a formal program for families. There's a display in our museum called Daniel's Story, and we recommend that for students 11 years old or younger, along with their parents, that this is something they should go through. Daniel's Story is a composite story of many survivors' stories that takes students through the history of the Holocaust. But I'll add this, and that is, we also get many visitors to our museum, and I think it raises a question that we need to ask ourselves. And that is, what do we know about our audiences, and how do we know it? My guess is that if I were to ask everybody in this room, do you know your audiences? You'd all say, sure we do. I was taken down a peg this year by a researcher who said, when we say, I know my audience, what we're really saying is, I know myself and I know how I learn. And so what I would encourage is that we need to find out through rigorous, transparent research who our audiences are, whether they're families, or we talked earlier about students. What are the narratives that those students come to us with? We can make an assumption about what does a Muslim student think, but that's simply an assumption. What I can tell you in my own work is that by doing a little bit of audience research, it has transformed the work that we're doing in teacher education. I'll give you just a small example. Before programs now, before any educational program, in the process of registering for a program, we have a survey that we give teachers. And one of the questions we ask them is, what are the books or videos, films that you use when you teach about the Holocaust? Now you can imagine that the Diary of Anne Frank is by far the most widely used in the United States. There are a lot of reasons for that. One is that in almost every 9th grade English anthology, the Diary of Anne Frank in some form is in there. Secondly was night. And then 2 years ago, the third, by a long shot, was the boy in the striped pajamas. Now, there's a couple of things we can do. We can wring our hands and say, this is horrible, right? What are we going to do? They're reading the boy in the striped pajamas. We all know about that. Although I will say this, just in an informal survey I've been doing this week, I have yet to meet someone at this conference who has seen the film.
No, I saw the film.
Don't be defensive. Of those I asked, they said, we have not seen the film. So I think that as educators, first of all, we need to see those things. But then the second part is, if we know that in a workshop like this, we have a third of our teachers who are using the boy in the striped pajamas as their text, we've got a responsibility. We can't ignore it and say, oh, it's horrible. We've got to directly look at that with the teachers. So what it did for us was it changed the way that we worked. We said we've got to be direct about it. So we looked at a couple of small clips in that movie. One of the clips, for those 6 of you who have seen it, is that if you know the story, it's the story of a young German boy who is taken from his home in Berlin with his family when his father becomes the commandant of what the author cloyingly calls Auschwitz. So this boy is ripped from his home, he leaves his friends, he's looking for friendship. He finds, interestingly enough, a boy in striped pajamas who lives on the other side of the fence.
You use it. You're running out of time.
Wow. I guess I've been talking a little long. Anyway, as the story goes on, at the very end of the story, every day now, this young German boy crawls under the fence and plays with Shmuel, his new friend. And they play, and then at the end of the day, the young boy, whose name is Bruno, goes back under the fence and leaves. Now, we looked at that little scene. Every day, Bruno goes under, comes back out. We asked a question. Okay, what's missing here? What is it telling your audience that this young Jewish boy, Shmuel, does not go out the fence too? And teachers came back and said, well, of course, it's just solidifying that myth that they went like sheep to the slaughter, right? Which is what we don't want to do educationally. We looked at the very end of the film where the 2 boys, unwittingly, walk into the gas chamber and are murdered. The film ends with a scene outside the fence of Auschwitz. The mother, the daughter are distraught, crying. And we asked the teachers, where do your sympathies lie? No one feels badly for the little Jewish boy, for his family, for his grandmother, for any of his friends. All their sympathies lie with that family. And so by deconstructing this film, we're able to change practice. Now, if we hadn't asked that simple question, we never would have been able to, again, change our practice and help teachers, give them the tools to do something differently.
Peter, thank you. Is this working? Yes, working. Jacques, you want
yes,
to comment?
the issue of the families is very important because I think we have to change the image that we give to the public. It's not easy to enter in a Shoah museum. It's better to go in the art museum, in
Disneyland.
In Disneyland. Yes, when you are a family, it's much more pleasant to go there than in a Shoah museum. And I think we have to deal with that, and we have to give an offer to the families, and to become a place of life. It means that we decided to offer activities for families. Sunday or in the evening, they can come with the family. Sometimes we have activities for the parents and activities for the children, separate. Sometimes we are creating activities together, and they are doing things together. It's a choral, it's art, it's a guided tour together. And you know, when you live in a place, in a city, where you have a lot of museums, you have also to think about the offer, because it's also a competition. When you have in a city like Paris, so many exhibits in Paris, and if you want to exist, it's not enough to have a Shoah museum and a very sensitive subject. You have to give the opportunity to come and to show them that they will find something that they will not find elsewhere. And this is very important. And when we welcome children, schools in the museum, we give them information because we hope that they will come back with their parents. It's very important because when we receive the schools in France, it's also compulsory 3 times in the curriculum. And we hope, especially when we have people coming from different origin communities, we hope that they will come back with their parents. We have to motivate first the kids, and after that, they will come back with the family.
Jacques, thank you. Avner, I'm going to ask you a question that comes from a different place, technology. And technology is something that we're all employing. We're using different museums. What is Yad Vashem doing to employ technology to get the story out? I give you the simple questions.
Okay, fine. Thank you. I want to relate first again to Bill and the question of the families. One word with regard to Bill, you're right. And my experience is for my colleagues. Even I can feel it in Israel a bit. I do not want to elaborate. There is a lot of pressure to follow, I would dare to say it here, kind of a fashion, actually, to divert from the authentic core issue in a given community or center that has made the decision. Someone has made the decision, or a group have made it, that the topic of the Shoah is relevant event, is interesting event, is important enough to deal with it specifically. And with the time, actually, they want to divert from it and to go to the stories of other narratives, which is okay, as I said before. But we have to keep the particular story and the mission of the given center. And I think that some of us, and I know exactly, are actually are active under this kind of pressure. And they have to find a way, and in some cases I was involved in this kind of discourse, to give good arguments to the curators and educators and the directors of those museums, small museums, or not too small museums, to protect the relevancy of their story for the universal messages. And this is the way that we have to cope with it. And I think that if they are strong enough to have this kind of discourse with the, I don't know, the Directorate or the Gvirim, those who support the museum, they will win on the long run. But we have to be aware about it and to support them and to support the community. We confront, and we have some friends here from Canada. It's a very peculiar story, maybe rightly so, that Asper, the late Asper, IIya Asper, whom you know, some of you know, was here, and he had a dream. He has a dream to establish an Holocaust center, Holocaust museum in Canada, in his place, not in Toronto and not in other center. And suddenly he passed away. And then the whole story changed. And it was converted to another type of a museum that deals with other atrocities and suffering at large, and they lost their way. What is relevant to the suffering of human beings? And at the end of the day, the Shoah almost was out, because why should we tell the story of the Shoah? And this was a whole story. And right now we have one gallery that will deal with the Shoah, and from a perspective that is quite difficult for me. So it's there, and the pressure is there. And if the pressure of the Ukraine communities in Canada politically is very strong, I cannot differ if they will establish a museum, a center that deals with the Holodomor, which is their story of that genocide and that perspective. And then any one of us will have the opportunity to get some good knowledge and some experience about that case in history. And afterwards, to take out our own, as it was said here correctly, I think a process of reflection. So this is the A, and it's very important, and thank you for presenting this case. The other one is with regard to the family. Usually in Yad Vashem, we don't have specific, and it's very important, projects for families. We have projects for age-appropriate presentations or displays in our museum. Basically, we thought that below the age of 10 or 11, we wouldn't recommend youngsters to come, but we have other different displays, specifically the display of children creativity that we have produced specifically for those who are in the elementary schools and even in the kindergarten. And we have some other elements on our side. We have a campus that are appropriate for those experiences. And we develop them very intensively and very systematically. And Shulamit, who is not here, and many other educators in our school have developed this kind of approach very systematically. But I think an average Israeli will come here to Yad Vashem maybe more than once, 2, 3, 4 times, it differs, when he's in the school until he concludes his high school. The second experience will be when he's coming to the national service, which is a compulsory service. Most of them are coming at least 1 or 2 times to Yad Vashem and other centers. We have representative for other centers here in Israel. And then they will skip quite a good period for another decade. They are very busy with their studies, establishing a family, and earn their life in Israel is not so simple. And I must admit. And then you can find them again in the 40s. And there are a variety of reasons. They have some kids, they have friends who are coming, they are dealing again with their own identity, collective identity questions, and they prefer to come ask with part of the family in many cases. But we do not have specific plans. We planned it at the beginning in the Valley of Communities and other places, and I think that we should come to it because the initiative is there in the school and our initiative, but we are not yet there. It's very important to us because this kind of a dialogue, a real dialogue between dead generations, parents, grandparents, grandparents are coming with grandchildren on their own, which is a very important phenomena, and we can understand it. A lot has been said and written about it. This is the second point, and for us it's very important to encourage this kind of a dialogue between the generations, parents, grandparents, in this context. And technology now.
Avner, I'm going to stop you. I hope you won't
Please.
fire me. But I'm going to stop you. And I'm going to ask the technology question to Tzvi. Thank you for answering those questions. Okay.
Thank you. You know, we're all using technology right now. This is technology. Using chalk on a slate, which I actually did back in the States in the 50s, that was technology. So I'd like to pose a question. Why is technology suddenly the buzzword that we're all concerned with? We do use technology. We have to use technology. We'll always use technology. The question is how to use it well. In fact, Ephraim said something earlier in the week when he took us on us Australians through the museum. I don't know if you realize the profundity of what you said, but you were showing us the Bielski brothers and resistance. And you said there's a book by Duffy and there's a book by Nechamatek, but read the books, but you have to see the movie. Now, it used to be, kids would say, well, I've seen this movie, and then we would say, yes, but you have to read the book. And the fact is, the movie trumps the books for most of the young people who will be seeing, and that's the way it is, and so be it. But I'm sure those of you who use technology in museums, in your museums, and we have recently renovated our museum and have will reconfigure the museum entirely from the ground up with a huge investment in what we call story pods. And I know some of you in the museum, in here, have been there. And they're soft touch screens, and a survivor's face appears, and he'll talk, and then there are photos and maps and pictures. But I'm sure, no matter what type of technology you use, like ours or your own, when you get letters from students and visitors in the visitor book, like IIya mentioned, no one has ever written, "Thank you for what a wonderful museum, for a wonderful museum. I have never met such an inspirational computer in my life." And you can't hug a computer. And I know that, again, we're blessed with many survivors in our museum. And the highlight for our visitors, and some adults, but mostly the teenagers, they hug a survivor. And they shake hands. And that will never be replaced by technology. On the other hand, as we all know, we have to prepare for the eventuality when the survivor won't be with us. What then? So the technology, we have to use it. We have to use it well. But I would caution everybody in that it's not a panacea. You know that. You know that. And our soft touch computer screens, our story pods, I often watch the students from a couple of meters away, and they go, because the pages make sound effects, and they walk away. And I've got to say to us, I'll say, hold on a minute, guys, come back here. I'm not sure you noticed something here. And they're happy to come back and be guided and taught, shown, whatever the verb is, because the students and technology, remember, as we all said, someone said yesterday, this is their world. They don't even realize it. They're like fish in water. It's no big deal for them. We think, oh, look how wonderful these story pods are. So please, if we're using technology, and we all will, we always have, and we always will, we mustn't lose sight of the value of the human being, whether it's the survivor or those of us who will have to say to a group of students, you know, I knew this man named Willie. And Willie told me that when he was in Dachau, and here's his photo, and I do know Willie, and I can't even begin to conceive of the day when I'll have to say, I once knew a man named Willie, but we all have our Willies, I'm sure, in our lives and our wonderful survivors. But we will have to do that. The computer won't do that for us.
Thank you. Questions, other questions? Barbara. No, stand up and please identify.
My question is to Jacques. You said that you work with public schools. So the question is, do you work with Catholic schools and Christian schools, Muslim schools? Because in New Jersey, all the archdioceses support Holocaust education, and we work tremendously with them.
Yes, of course. It means that we don't have Muslim school in France until today. We have Jewish school, Catholic school, and public school. And we are working with all of them. And I have to tell you that the most interesting pedagogical projects are coming from Catholic school. And because they have a very motivated team in general, much more motivated than in public school. And we have a lot of interest coming from Catholic schools. I have to tell you that we have a problem with Jewish school, not only because we don't like the Jews, we like the Jews, but I don't know, we try to have a very special offer with Jewish school because they don't like a neutral historical approach. And they want to give us their own guide. We refuse. Because they want us to give a religious approach. And we refuse that. We want to give knowledge to the same knowledge to everybody. We don't want to make a choice. We have to be close and to prepare with the teachers the visit of the museum, and we have to give different things to different classes, but the same for everybody. it's not because you are Jewish or Muslim or no. I think we can't accept that, and we work on that offer. And because I'm sorry to use the word offer, but we have to convince teachers to come to the memorial with a very interesting pedagogical offer that they will not find in a very huge place that welcomes hundred of school. Because what we are doing is that we try to do is not the massification of the visits. It's to each school we give a very special visit with their expectation. And it's the same thing with Catholic school. It means that for me, we were talking about technology. Nothing can replace a visit of authentic sites or museums like we are. And because for me, a visit in a museum like us, it's also a meeting. We have to help people because the subject is difficult, the knowledge is important, and we have to be the mediator between the visitor and the knowledge. And technology can't do that, but we can do it, and in particular with people who have a very special motivation.
Jacques, thank you. Yes. Let's get another question. Another question, Graciela. Yes. Where are you from?
I'm from the United States.
Okay, United States.
My name is Masha Haddadi Kodamopoulos, and I'm from Kehela Kadosh Yanina Synagogue and Museum. And I probably used up all of my time just in that.
Your question.
Okay. My question is, have any of you devised questionnaires that are given previous to the visit of school groups and then afterwards to see what impact the knowledge that you are giving has on the people who are there to receive it?
IIya, would you like to respond?
Well, we don't have a special questionnaires before, but we have a lot of the oral questionnaires with the teachers when we invited some school to our museum and explained why it important to visit us, and when we invited them for some memorial events. This is one case. When we invited like January 27 or Yom HaShoah, when we invited the students from non-Jewish school for so-called marathon of memory, when we invited 3 persons, one from a prisoners of the ghetto, one Jewish partisan, and one liberator. Unfortunately, the last righteous among the nation now died. First 10 years they was in our team. So we explained what we need, what they want, and so on. After, we have, I think, some unique experience to receive the information about the successful teaching Holocaust in my country. During 12 years, sorry, we hold our context for students and teachers. And on the level or answer of this context, we could receive information why the students decide to choose the subject of the Holocaust. And we try to push so-called, it's for my opinion, active memory. We are living in this space where only on the territory of former Soviet Union today presented 2,500 places where Jews were killed. And I think only some 100 monuments that mention the word Jew or six-corner star or ghetto something else. So what we suggest to our teachers, firstly teachers, and then with our students, to raise the question, ask, maybe you could help to us righteous among the nation. I give only one example. During our seminar together in Yad Vashem in August, one student from Pskov region received the information about righteous among the nation. And this much Yad Vashem devoted to person received this title. Only this information, together with children who visited this family, collected the information. So my dream is, maybe I'm a dreamer, you are from different countries, and very often in your community, even the person who remembered that my grandparents came from Russia, on Poland, so on, very often
all
Poland.
came from
This
Russia.
is, okay? Maybe if you ask the question, what is this a city? And we receive the answer. Open our Encyclopedia Holocaust on the territory of USSR. Each article mentioned is monument exists. is this monument noted the Holocaust or Jewish victims? And you have a unique chance to involve your students in practical work to preservation memory about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Linda.
Linda Medvin, Chair of the Florida Holocaust Education Task Force. This is really directed to you, Zvi. You have the luxury of using teachers that have a built-in constituency of teachers that have been trained by Yad Vashem. What happens when you run out of those teachers, and what are you doing to build the and sustain capacity among the educational personnel?
Thank you for that. Actually, I think I need to clarify something then. When I mention teachers who have been here, I mean they are teachers in the school system or in the private schools in and around Melbourne or Victoria, the state, who bring their students, but they are working in schools. Other than myself and maybe 4 or 5 other people, our museum is strictly and totally volunteers, including the volunteer guides who take the school groups through the museum with the survivors. So we are not, other than myself and maybe 1 or 2 other people, not trained teachers. And it is a very big challenge, but a very rewarding one, to train our guides to guide. And I know that the teachers, their feedback, and we have had some questionnaires sent out in the past, and I think we should do that again now that the question was raised. But they're very appreciative of the style of guiding that our guides are adopting, because it reflects what the teachers are doing in the classroom, which is not lecturing. I don't think there's a good teacher, at least, in a classroom who just stands at the chalkboard, whiteboard, smartboard, whatever board, and lectures, because then the kids are bored. And it's got to be very engaging and very interactive. And that's what we try to do. So I think I may have given you a much rosier picture about our museum, that, gee, all our guides have been to this center. No, on the contrary. One of our guides is with us, with the group now, a volunteer guide. She happens to be my wife, who's sitting right there. And I wish I could bring all of our guides here, and maybe we'll work on that.
Richard, I'm going to ask you, because it's a loaded question. How do you sustain manpower as well, train manpower in your museum?
Manpower and woman power, yes.
And woman power.
Okay, so it is a challenge. It starts off with motivated individuals who have picked up the program and are pioneers. And then it moves from that to people who have to be employed. And you have to find the manpower to sustain that. So volunteers are an essential part of what Cape Town and the other centers rely upon for augmenting the programs, but not running the programs. The programs are facilitated by permanent employees, people who have been trained. And some of them have been to the Yad Vashem courses, and some of them are coming, and some of them are still coming here. So, and that we find is important in terms of their building their historical knowledge. But in terms of building their understanding of context, and in terms of building their understanding of the South African education system, it's important that these people have education training, that they are trained educators in our own system. And we have been very fortunate to have attracted excellent people who have come out of the school systems, not necessarily Jewish, but who have a good understanding of history, who are people who are committed to the values that we espouse, and who come in sometimes with not much knowledge. So we have to grow that content knowledge ourselves in the first instance, and then look for opportunities such as bringing them here to grow that content knowledge to ensure that they are teaching the right stuff.
Thank you, Rich. And I must add that 2 of Rich's staff will be participating in our summer international seminar, which will take place from July 1st to the 19th. Thank you for sending your staff members to our seminar. Nora wanted to ask a question. Ghetto Fighters House. I'll introduce you. It's okay. Yeah, why not? From the Ghetto Fighters House, Nora.
I'm in charge of the Spanish desk in the Gate of Fighters House in the Western Galilee. I wanted to ask you, how do you dream about your museum in 20 years from now? It will be the same museum?
Okay, now we're dreaming. Okay. That's a difficult one. Does anyone want to? Peter. Okay.
I'm going to say this with a nod to Dorit, who opened a few nights ago, it seems like several weeks ago, but who opened a few nights ago talking about an artifact that had moved her. And when I go through our museum, every time I walk through our exhibit, I find something that touches me. But one of the things, since my first visit there in 1997, continues to resonate with me. There is in our, on our fourth floor, which is the first floor of the exhibition, in a section about the pogroms of November 1938, there is a lintel that framed the Ark of the Covenant in Nentershausen, Germany. And above, on top of the lintel, there are words in Hebrew that have been scratched out, hacked with axes, knives, or whatever. I don't speak or read Hebrew, but I know that the English translation is, know before whom you stand.
Da lifnei mi she'ata omed.
Okay, know before whom you stand. I take that as a challenge to all of us in all of our centers, that we approach this topic with a combination of humility and curiosity. Let me give you an example of humility. We all say, this is what I do, or at our museum we, and we should stop ourselves when we say that. And we should think about a more imaginative question. We need to think about the what if question, the what now question, so that we're not sharing our experiences, but we're really drawing on the wisdom of our experience. Part of that also, I think, any sustainability depends on networks and cooperation. And again, that takes humility, because sometimes we've got to step back and say, I've got to give a little to get a little. And so for me, that's an answer to how do we ensure that in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, our museums are continuing. It's really building on what's in this room right now, and it's what we do now for the future, not what we've done, not what we do.
Thank you. Do I have other questions? Yes, please stand up.
Thanks.
Say it again so we can hear you.
Manfred Wichmann, Jewish Museum Berlin. And I will follow up question to the question of using technology. And I refer to a post-survivor world because we all agree that there will be no equivalent or replacement for survivors. But in a post-survivor world, I want to ask about the role and importance of objects, of artifacts, of the authentic material. And to sharpen the question, if you have a fixed budget and you have to decide whether to give the money for a restoration and collecting artifacts or to develop a new multimedia tool for educational program, what would you decide? If you will not decide, what is the potential of the aura of objects versus the potential of technologies of multimedia?
You're giving us a dilemma. Graciela, would you like to relate to that?
Well, the Buenos Aires Holocaust Museum has more or less 4,000 objects in the collection. And I think that in places like Buenos Aires, so far from the place where the Shoah happened, and also so far in the time we need a collection, a big collection to show students, to show in our exhibitions, and to have the opportunity to show all the people, not only the students, that we have a very cleaning and they are in a special place because we are taking care on each one of the objects of this collection. We are also working to have this on the web to give opportunity to the people around the world to see our collection. And the question is how we have this. Well, we have this because the survivors at the second generation gave this to us. And it was not an easy work. They didn't like to give to nobody. But we have this, and we had to demonstrate them that we really are working on this, and we really will take care on each one of the documents. We need these documents to show, and we need these documents to be a museum and to develop around each one of the documents the story of the document, that it includes the story of the survivor, if we could.
I can't say no. I did once already, I don't want to get in trouble. Okay, Avner.
I think that you presented a very important issue. And we have to make the priorities, as you know. And I think that right now, and the situation will continue in the future, we are trying to balance the priorities. And if we, in Yad Vashem, have to make the set of priorities with regard to jump ahead with technology, or still to pay a lot of attention, money, means and efforts for the collection of artifacts, for example, and evidence, we shall keep going with collecting the artifacts and collection, and we shall a bit delay, if we cannot do both. We are trying to do both in a balanced way. But right now, I can tell you, and Chaim was here, and some of my colleagues, that we embarked almost a year ago about a national project of collecting the fragments from the survivors. And we know that they have a lot of important, if you want, material, artifacts, photographs, letters, diaries, still, and other elements which are very important to us. And we said, let's try it. And after a year, we are prolonging it, after we got more than 30,000 all kinds of artifacts. Unbelievable, very important artifacts and other parts of material. And we should keep going onward with it. The same thing with the testimonies. We are intensifying our efforts to collect visual testimonies in the last few years, and I think that we should continue in the future. So from this perspective, we should not stop it, because I think that the importance of the authenticity of artifacts and other parts of material will be even bigger and more important 20 years from today. They will be more rare, they will tell the authentic story, and they will be really needed. So it's really, we are building the future. This is the A. The B, one comment about technology. We can say a lot about technology, and I agree with my colleague from Melbourne. We have to use them wisely and in a very limited way. But I think the most important element with regard to technology is actually to bring an interactive connection between the museum or our students and the general part of the world. And to bring, we're dealing, Yad Vashem, I don't know, over 1 million visitors and 250,000 students in our international school. But we have millions, tens of millions of visitors via the internet in Yad Vashem right now. And what we want to do is to bring them to be, not to say our contributors, workers, because in our photograph archives we have hundreds of active workers, if you want, every day for us. And this kind of discourse is very essential for us and very important for us. So I think that we can build a different world of activity that will be interactive from our perspective. And this is a totally different world. And we are doing a lot because to keep these huge, huge repositories of information, knowledge in Yad Vashem, I don't know, tens or now hundreds bits of information, and not to give a good access to the world, the public, general public in the world, to be some players in that huge, I think, repositories of Yad Vashem and others is a big mistake. So we are doing all the efforts to find the way to give accessibility in an interactive manner to our knowledge and information basis, and think that this is the future of the technology.
Avner, thank you very much. I'm going to stop here. I want to thank, first of all, every member of the panel. I know you came from far away. It was fascinating, the questions that you answered, the questions that you posed. I want to thank the audience.